Now, I actually really like the idea of a League of Reason call-in show. I think that it's a very good call-in show. It's very interesting. I've listened through all the discussions that have occurred so far. But the last one with VyckRo in particular, there's a couple things I'd like to comment on. Now, I don't know if you have control over this. It might have just been Skype. I think these are run over Skype. With VyckRo's broken English and the cutting in and out already, it was very difficult to follow the conversation. But beyond that, what I felt that this particular episode really lacked was potentially, say, DPR Jones as a moderator, just reiterating the point simplified, because there seemed to be a lot of dancing around the same point over and over without ever getting a concrete definition or answer. And at one point, Aron Ra did something I was really thankful for. He was tried to say, answer this question, yes or no. I can't remember what it was in regards to. I think it was probably in regards to the burden of proof and, that whole argument, because a lot of the show revolved around that. And then DPR Jones, and I don't mean to fault anyone for this, like, it was, things happen. But DPR Jones sort of moved on to the third point at that time. But I feel like more constructive conversations and discussions would take place if callers were required to, answer definitive yes or no questions with a yes or no at the time. That being said, obviously, I also think that the panel should be required to answer yes or no questions given by the caller. And both of these would sort of be instigated by DPR Jones reiterating the point, simplified, and making sure that the caller's point has been understood and that the panelists have understood the point. And then essentially what you could say is just the panelists say, yes, I do, or no, I don't, and the caller could say, yes, I do agree, or no, I don't agree. And at that point, the opposing party can ask why not, or they can simply move on to another argument rather than dance around these points that seem to take up 40 minutes of the conversation. It was still fairly interesting, but a bit hard to follow because of things like this, coupled with the broken English that VyckRo used, and coupled with the unfortunate static and dropping of calls and other things like that. In regards to VyckRo's point, though, the entire argument could have been settled with a statement along these lines, and everyone sort of produced a similar argument, but never a definitive argument or a definitive statement. Simply put, what you are trying to say, VyckRo, was that you cannot prove that a God does not exist. And if you notice the sentence structure there, it's cannot prove a God does not exist. It is a double negative. You cannot prove a double negative. And to demonstrate this, let's use the teacup on Pluto. If you were to claim that there is a teacup on Pluto, and I said, I don't think there's a teacup on Pluto, and you said, you can't prove that there isn't a teacup on Pluto, would that be a reason for me to accept the claim that there's a teacup on Pluto? At this point, I would hope that VyckRo would say, well, no, you wouldn't have to accept that there is a teacup on Pluto, because just because someone has said there's a teacup on Pluto doesn't mean that there is. And then at the same time, people like VyckRo or creationists or theists would want to sort of address the idea that you're getting at before you finished your point. And this is a real problem with arguments of this nature. You sort of have to just make sure that you get your point entirely heard before you let them address a counter argument. So the next logical statement would be to say, well, let's replace the statement of a teacup on Pluto with God. Because you say that a God exists, and I cannot prove that he does not, does that mean I have to accept that a God exists? Does that mean I have to accept that there is a teacup on Pluto? And you already agreed with me that that doesn't mean I have to accept a teacup on Pluto, so what does God bring to the table that is particularly special, that makes him outside these rules of logic? And if you can't think of anything, then you'd have to accept the position that God is like a teacup on Pluto. You can't prove that he does exist, and you can't prove that he doesn't exist. The position that atheists take is, until you can demonstrate to me that a God exists, until you can demonstrate to me that there is a teacup on Pluto, I will not accept the claim that there is a God or there is a teacup on Pluto. That is the definition of atheism, is the lack of acceptance, the lack of belief in a theistic claim. We are without theism, atheistic. That being said, I love the show. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job. And I realize that in the moment of things, everyone's got perfect hindsight, and everyone can analyze the past and say, oh, well, we could have done this better, and we could have done that better. And at the time, it's kind of difficult to, sort of edit these things out or do things where, interrupt people at the right time. But I think that something that would help the calls be more concise and more on the point is if DPR Jones could step up more as a moderator, assert yourself a little more in the conversation and say, so let me get this straight, this is the point you're making, and then, gain the understanding between the two parties of the points, because it seemed to me like VyckRo didn't really understand the points the panelists were making, and at certain times, the panelists weren't addressing what VyckRo was talking about as directly as they could have. Cheers! Think about it.